Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I am Tony Quintana, the plant-based eating program manager with Animal Protection of New Mexico. And with us today, we have Gabriel Garden. He's a registered dietitian, a plant-based eating enthusiast, and just overall awesome person. So thank you for being with us, Gabriel.
Happy to be here, Tony.
Awesome. And so yeah, as you know, as a parent, today we're going to be going into several different topics, different ideas, statements that you might have heard about plant-based eating, and dissect whether they're myths or facts. Maybe there's some, facts in there. Maybe they're based in some fact or something like that. And so, hopefully we're going to have a really interesting conversation. Let's go ahead and get into the first topic, which is we're going to start off with protein and kind of just have the conversation because that's one of the main things that comes up that you hear people talk about most often is that plant-based eaters don't get enough protein. You might have heard one of these quotes or something similar to this, that vegans are weak or plant-based diets make you weak, something along these lines like that. So do you have any thoughts just off the bat, Gabriel?
Well, I just watched a video recently. For anybody out there, if you haven't seen the Game Changers, the documentary, go watch it. Do yourself a favor because you'll see some obviously people who are on 100% plant-based or vegan diets that are more ripped than probably anybody you know in your own life, and huge too, and incredibly strong, right? And I saw a little video that they threw together. They did like a weightlifting day in Venice, where they were working out. This didn't have to do with the documentary, it was separate, but it was some of the bodybuilders that they feature in the documentary. And they go ask each of these guys that question, where do you get your protein? And I love that one of the guys said, he says, if you're asking me that question, you should think a lot harder about where you get your protein. And I thought, I'd never, I've been a vegan now for 8 years, plant-based, registered dietitian, hardcore, right? And I'd never thought about it that way. I just thought that was really cool. It's like, hey man, if you're worried about protein, or if you don't know where I get my protein, it's like, you should think more about where you're getting your protein. So I thought that was cool.
That's an interesting tidbit and a good way to think about it. Yeah. So people should be aware of all the different sources of protein, right? The vast sources of protein. So this one's pretty easy to kind of break down. There's not a whole lot to get into right here, right? The fact of it basically is that, plant-based eaters get plenty of protein by eating enough calories and a varied diet. So that's where the key comes in, right? You could follow a plant-based diet and eat potato chips and donuts all day. That's not really a varied diet. But if you're eating a variety of foods, right? Beans, grains, fruits, vegetables, etc., and you're getting enough calories, then the protein just stacks up by itself. Because contrary to popular belief, there is protein in all plant foods. A lot of us grow up thinking that meat is the only place that you could get protein, or then, we break off from there and we learn that there's some high protein plant foods like beans and tofu and stuff like that. So then some people think, well, that's the only way to get protein then, and you have to eat tons of tofu and beans and nuts and seeds all the time. But it's good to know that vegetables have protein, grains have protein, even fruits have protein in smaller amounts, right?
It all adds up, my man.
Yeah. And
yes,
just kind of.
So again, go ahead, Tony. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, shifting those quotes to something a little bit more accurate, on the plus side, plant-based diets may help prevent chronic diseases, improve health and longevity. And as you stated before, many high-performing athletes follow plant-based diets we see from documentaries, but also from just experience. Well, in professional sports, we know, we watch professional athletes perform, and then we know that some of them are on plant-based diets.
Yeah, and it's growing, right? I mean, it used to be fringe, and to some extent, yeah, we're still certainly a minority. There's this much smaller percentage of people are, follow plant exclusive or, plant-based or certainly vegan, whatever you want to call it, diets.
Mhm.
But nonetheless, we all know that we need to eat more plants. We need to eat more fruits and vegetables. That's just a no-brainer. And sadly, we live in a toxic food culture. And so where, Big Macs and, French fries and milkshakes are around every corner. And so, and those foods are highly addictive. They put so much salt, oil, and sugar in these foods, and of course all the processed flour, and that gives us that dopamine rush when we eat it, and that's what keeps us coming back for more because it makes you feel good in the moment. It tastes so good in the moment. Of course, afterwards, an hour or two later, you get the crash and you feel bad and you need another fix. And then 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road, you've got esophageal, you've got gastroesophageal reflux disease or heartburn, or you've got ulcers in your stomach, or you've got problems going on with your lower GI, your small intestine, your large intestine. And you end up getting colon cancer, or you get ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome. That's a lot of fun, right? And so, but it's hard, right? I know it's an uphill battle for people. And so, yes, and it's a trade-off too. We know we can get enough protein on a plant-based diet. We know that. It's, again, it's like, this is old news now.
Mhm.
But we want to support people the best we can who don't have this information, or for whom this information is brand new. Number two, too much protein is not a good thing. It's a bad thing, right? And so we're so protein centric in our culture. We think more protein is always better. But hey, everyone, I want to tell you the truth. It's not. More protein is not always better, especially protein from a certain source. And that's protein from animal-based foods. They're high in branched chain amino acids, right? Those are certain amino acids. And when we're getting way too many of these branched chain amino acids, which are very rich in animal products, but they're slightly lower in plant-based proteins or plant-based foods, we're driving up our risk for a number of chronic diseases. Type 2 diabetes and heart disease, the two main ones, right? And heart disease is killing more people than anything else in the United States, right? And so we need to, so again, more protein is not always better. It's increasing our risk for heart disease and type 2 diabetes. And and there's so many trials to show this, wonderful peer-reviewed research. If you replace some of you don't even have to do it exclusively, right? It's just for every amount of plant-based or animal-based protein that you replace with plant-based protein. So more plant-based protein and less animal-based protein. It's not an all or nothing thing, right? You don't have to eliminate animal-based altogether to get the benefits. Just for every amount that you're making a swap between animal-based and plant-based, you're going to lower your risk for chronic disease. You're going to increase your risk for living a longer, healthier life. And so that's great news.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And it's just really interesting to think about, because you mentioned type 2 diabetes, and most people associate that with sugars and or carbs. And, really it's animal-based proteins and increased protein that plays
and certainly the animal-based fats too.
Right.
And again, right, we don't eat just fat or just protein. Again, because our culture is so mixed up, we concentrate on these individual nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
It's something called reductionism, right? Scientific reductionism. We reduce the sum of a whole entire food down to its individual constituents: protein, individual vitamins and minerals, carbohydrates, fat. But you don't just eat carbohydrates unless you're just sucking down sugar, right? Which obviously everybody knows we should drink less Coca-Cola or Fanta or Mountain Dew, whatever your fix is, because that's just, it's totally processed. It's not good for us. Right. But we're not just eating protein or fat or carbohydrate. We're eating food. We're eating meat, we're eating eggs, we're eating dairy, we're eating bananas or quinoa or kale or black beans, right? And these foods don't just have one thing in them. It's not just a carbohydrate or fat. It's got vitamins, minerals, proteins, carbohydrates, fat. It's got all that in there, right? And the bottom line is it's eating more animal foods and eating too few plant foods is one of the predominant primary problems that we have in our society. We need to eat less of these animal-based foods and obviously less sugar and less processed plant-based foods, potato chips, Oreos, cake, Dr. Pepper, right? That's all. A lot of those foods come from plants originally, but they're highly fractionated, ultra processed. They look nothing like a whole plant food. So we got to eat less of the ultra processed, less animal foods, and more whole plant foods if we want to turn our health around and live a good, healthy life.
Awesome. Thanks for all of that. So moving on to the next one. And so this is one that we hear often, that you need cow's milk for calcium. It comes up a lot, vegans don't have strong bones, or the worry that you're not going to get enough calcium if you switch to a plant-based diet. And of course, the classic, that a lot of us grew up with in the 90s, milk does the body good. So what are your thoughts on this statement when people come out, and say, but you need cow's milk for calcium, right?
Yeah, I mean, the first reaction is, hey, it's a great advertisement for dairy, right? It's propping up the dairy industry and it's making sure that they make a lot of money. But the bottom line is, well, yeah, it's making a lot of money for the dairy industry, but what's it doing for you? What's it doing for you and your health and the health of your children? And again, full stop, it's not doing anything good for human health. And yes, there is research, right? Because there's a lot of research that, is funded by the industry. So
Mhm.
people can find research that makes cow's milk look good, right? It is full of calcium, that's true. The problem is you get the bonus of calcium, but it comes with the baggage of branched chain amino acids, like we mentioned, high in animal-based foods, of saturated fat and cholesterol. Again, high in animal-based foods, but very low, or just, or plant-based products are free of those things. And so you're getting the baggage of things that we know. Again, full stop. There's no conversation here. If people want to argue about it, they're pulling at straws. Increasing saturated fat, cholesterol intake, branched chain amino acid intake, whatever the case is going to increase our risk for chronic disease. So you're getting lots of calcium, which is good. Yeah, we need calcium, but you're getting the baggage of all these other things that are no good for us. How about instead we get the bonus of getting calcium in our beans, in our dark leafy greens, in our seeds, which are going to be some of your best sources of calcium in a plant-based diet, but you don't get any of the baggage that comes with them. Instead, you just get fiber, you get vitamins and minerals, you get phytonutrients. So you get the bonus without the baggage. With plant-based foods, you're getting calcium and you're getting a lot of other good things that are supporting your health rather than deteriorating your health. And so, yes, we don't need, and again, the calcium recommendations are higher than they need to be. And I'm not saying calcium is not an issue. It is important. It's important for our overall health. It's certainly important for our bone health. But the extreme concentration or focus that we have, or worry or preoccupation that we have with calcium has a lot to do with industry and less to do with the overall state of our health. And again, I'm not telling anyone that we don't need to worry about it. We want to incorporate a lot of calcium-rich foods into our diet. And again, just like with the protein, if you're eating a well-rounded, varied diet that has fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, mushrooms, nuts, and seeds, and especially our beans, some of our different seeds and our dark leafy greens, you're going to be getting enough calcium. And then, of course, if there's other issues, you can talk with your healthcare provider, and you could always even take a supplement. But anyway, there's a few points there. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, no, that was really well said. all of what you said. And then I also just like to remind people too about the high percentage of people who are lactose intolerant or have, sensitivities or allergies to dairy or to cow's milk. Me personally, I didn't know that I had sensitivities till I stopped, till I cut out all dairy. And then all of a sudden it's like my allergies got better, my asthma got better, headaches, different things that we think are just a normal part of life, or we're not sure what to attribute them to, might be to a sensitivity in a food. And that lactose intolerance disproportionately affects people of color as well. So
It's a racial justice issue, man. And if the
absolutely.
dairy industry had any heart and had any science base, right, they'd figure, oh yeah, this is, Asian Americans, Native Americans, Latinx Americans, and certainly Black Americans, right, much higher rates of lactose intolerance. And so it's a total racial justice issue. And that's at the fore right now, we know, with all the racial justice issues that are going on in our country. And so just stack this up with another one of them. We shouldn't have cow's milk or dairy on our US dietary guidelines, full stop. Canada did a good thing, and in their most recent version of their dietary guidelines, they removed it. And what did they tell people to drink? Water, the healthiest beverage, the most hydrating beverage on earth. You should be drinking water, not cow's milk. Get your calcium where you get the bonus, not the baggage, your dark leafy greens, your beans, and then just, say goodbye to cow's milk and start living a good, healthy life. Boom.
Yeah, I like that. Bonus, not baggage. That should be a
That's right. And
t-shirt
I
or
can't take
slogan.
credit for that. I don't want to
Okay.
plagiarize. That comes from Michael Greger at nutritionfacts.org. I got that
Okay.
from the man.
I hadn't heard that before, but I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's the
Yeah.
man, of course. And so, yeah, good information. Go to nutritionfacts.org if you haven't been there. Incredible, evidence-based, non-commercial. It's not influenced by the industry. Nutrition information, free to the public. Check it out, everybody.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for that. So yeah, we figured we determined, deciphered that was a myth. So the fact is that cow's milk is not necessary for calcium. You mentioned some good sources that that we get our calcium from on plant-based diets. Important to note, for strong bones, physical activity is also an important component. And then you talked about the research and the baggage that comes with dairy. So perfect. All right, so getting into the next statement. How many people have heard this statement that plant-based diets are missing essential nutrients? So, we hear different versions of this all the time. You're going to need vitamins, or you're going to be missing something, or, this statement that a lot of people point out, plant-based diets are not natural because they don't contain vitamin B12, whereas omnivorous diets do contain B12, so they seem more natural. So there's kind of a little bit to unpack with this one. What are your initial thoughts?
Oh yeah, this is a big deal, obviously. And first thing I'd point to is B12 is the main nutrient of concern on a plant-based diet. And so the first thing I would want to point out for people is, if we were going back to a pre-industrial society, right, before we had chlorinated water chiefly, and also just a very highly sanitized environment, and including a sanitized food environment, we would get the B12 just like the animals that we eat, where we get B12, whether it's eating a steak or a hamburger or a chunk of chicken or whatever, chicken breast, whatever you're eating, and you're getting some B12 in those animal-based foods, right? The animals don't just magically have the B12 in them. They get the B12 from microbes in the soil that produce them. And of course, they get it then in their feed. If you're a cow who's grazing out in a pasture, B12 is produced by microbes in the soil. And because cows are eating dirt along with all the grass that they consume, they're going to get their B12 that way. And so humans would have had the same thing. We would have drank natural water that had some of this B12 that had just run off and gotten from the soil into the water, because we weren't drinking chlorinated water. Now, of course, that's a trade-off. We're not dealing with diseases like cholera that kill a ton of people because they drink unclean water, because we have our modern industrialized system. So that's a good thing. The only issue with our sanitized system is we're not going to get B12 naturally like the animals do, because they're naturally consuming some of that dirt in the food that they eat, because they're not washing all their food, and because they're drinking water that's just chilling out in the stream. They're not drinking water that's been filtered and been chlorinated. And so bottom line there, so pre-industrial society, a person on a completely plant-based diet eating no animal products could have gotten enough B12 in their diet, right? At least theoretically. And certainly they didn't have B12 supplements back then.
Right.
And what else? Anyway, that's good for now.
Yeah, no, that's really well said. So, B12 is kind of one of the main lingering things that, may be missing from plant-based diets currently. As you said, nature's way of eating plant-based, included B12, and it also included some potential public health issues that we've eradicated. But also, aside from that, we are not really missing anything else. Meat gives us some nutrients, dairy gives us some nutrients, along with some baggage, like you said, but we can get all of those nutrients from plant-based diets. So the key is just a well-planned plant-based diet, just like with any diet. And if you're going to eat meat, if you're going to follow any type of diet, in order to contain all the essential nutrients, needs to be well planned. And so while most of us worry about, protein and B12 and things like that, most Americans don't consume enough fiber. And that's something that should be on people's radar and a concern, which you can easily get on a plant-based diet. And additionally, everyone should monitor their B12 intake or have some awareness of it, because people who eat meat eaters, tend to be deficient in B12 alongside vegans as well, right?
Yeah, and especially as they age, right? So I can't remember what age the cutoff is, but when you either reach 50 or it may be 60. So I'm not quoting here, but nonetheless, in older adults, their capacity to absorb B12 decreases with age. It has to do with, I think, a thing called intrinsic factor. And anyway, our intrinsic factor goes down because our hydrochloric acid in our stomach tends to go down as we age. And because of all this, our capacity to absorb B12 goes down, because intrinsic factor has to do with our capacity to absorb B12. That being said, older as we age, regardless of how much meat we eat, our ability, or our chances, our probability of having optimal B12 levels are going to go down over time. And so older adults should be supplementing it with it anyway. And then again, many people that are under that age cutoff may have issues as well. And so it's something that would be good to get checked. And a supplement's cheap, but certainly in people following exclusively plant-based diets, again, the supplement's cheap. You should be taking a B12 supplement to make sure you don't have low B12 levels, because that is a health risk in people on plant-based or vegan diets. And it doesn't cost a lot of money. It's totally safe to supplement with a B12, supplement. And if you don't want to go the supplement route, even though that's what I highly recommend, right? As a registered dietitian, as somebody with a master's degree in public health, I know this stuff, I've done the research. I think a supplement's the best way to go. If you want to you can also go the route of eating fortified foods, right? So a number of different foods, whether it's plant-based meats, whether it's nutritional yeast, some plant-based milks have been fortified with vitamin B12. The issue with that, though, is you want to basically be getting them at least 3 squares a day. So 3 times a day or more, you want to be consuming these fortified foods. And it takes getting a certain amount from those fortified foods. And that starts to get a little bit more complicated. And so I like to recommend that people take a supplement in that case. And then, of course, some omnivores, and especially older omnivores, are going to have to supplement with B12 as well.
And the cool thing about those is there's some that you could just take once a week, as opposed to a daily dose of B12. You could do a weekly dose, right? And
exactly.
So, because I'm not good with the daily stuff, daily medication.
It can be a hassle.
It just, you forget, and I don't know how many times, but if, once a week on every Sunday or something like that. And related to this, we had a really good question. Do you believe our bodies would benefit from a vegan medical grade multivitamin?
That's a great question. It probably wouldn't hurt. I tend to be, being a real whole food, plant-based, registered dietitian. It's definitely best that we get our nutrients from whole foods. That's where they're most safely, most completely, most comprehensively packaged. Also, they work in synergy, right? The word synergy, they work together like a symphony. You think of a symphony, all the members of that symphony, violin, all the other different string instruments, they're all working together to produce something beautiful, right? Whereas, and in a whole food, the fiber and all the nutrients are packaged in a beautiful, natural way that's healthiest for the body. And so it's going to be best to get as many nutrients as we can from whole plant foods. And then, of course, but supplements can be what you consider like taking out an insurance policy, right? You're making sure that you've got all your bases covered. I personally take a supplement called Complement. I have no relation to the company, but it's a good one, because what it does is it's supposed to complement an already basically healthy and complete plant-based diet, and only provide the things that may be lacking, depending on the variety of your diet, depending on where your food was sourced, right? It could be selenium, it could be iodine, of course, vitamin B12. Some of these things can vary depending on the foods that we eat and where they come from. And so that's a supplement that's only giving you what you might not otherwise get in abundance, on a well varied, predominantly or completely whole food plant-based diet. So very healthy, nutritious diet. And so that's an option, complement. Or again, there's certain things you can do in terms of but again, yeah, I think if you want to take a multivitamin, there's nothing wrong with that, but don't think of vitamins as the catch-all or the cure-all, or hey, I'm taking my multivitamin so I can go get the vegan milkshake and the fries and whatever other really non-nutritious foods I want because I've got all my bases covered. No, we want to be getting our nutrition from whole plant foods as much as possible because we're going to best absorb and utilize those nutrients. And also we're going to make sure that our bodies aren't getting too much of anything because certain vitamins and things or minerals, if we're getting too much of them, there's toxicity levels and we want to avoid that as well. And again, the risk of toxicity goes way down when we're getting it through whole plant foods because our body has a better job of recognizing those nutrients and only absorbing what we need and not absorbing what we don't need.
Thanks for that. Particularly, I always bring that up with iron in terms of speaking about iron, but that's a really good point to make that you make about the toxicity and risk with plant foods versus animal foods. So thanks for that question. And that was a really good answer. So moving on, I've heard this one a lot, actually. You need meat and milk for energy. And it comes in different forms, like some of these examples. And this is one I've heard really often is, I tried going vegan for a week and I was just so tired all the time, or for a month or whatever, or, I just feel better when I eat more protein, or, I'm going to do better in my sporting event.
Hey, Tony, give me a minute. I need to go take a nap, man. I'm just feeling too tired.
He's playing ball. Matter of fact, yeah, I don't think I have the energy to finish it. I didn't have my meat this morning, but it comes up a lot. So, I have some thoughts, but do you have any thoughts for this one?
Yes. Number one, plant-based foods are lower in calorie density than animal-based foods and certainly ultra-processed junk foods, right? So you can't put the same amount of food on your plate that you were when you were eating steak and potatoes and a big old dollop of butter on there, which is super high in calorie density, right? Calorie density is just a concept for every quantity by weight of food that we're eating. A food will have a given number of calories, right? So 1 pound of oil has 4,000 calories, whereas 1 pound of vegetable has 100 calories. They're very different in terms of their calorie density, right? And we tend to eat about the same amount of food by weight every day. And when you transition to a plant-based diet, especially a healthy one, if it doesn't have just like loads of olive oil that you're eating all day, not that there's anything wrong with a little olive oil, but if you ate loads of it, chances are you're getting way too many calories. And so when people transition to a plant-based diet, they're eating lower calorie dense foods, but many of them continue to eat about the same amount of food that they did on the way that they've been eating for 20, 30, 40 years, however long they've been on a standard American diet. And the point is you cannot do that. You need to eat more volume, which is great because most people always have wanted to eat more volume. It has a lot to do with the fact that they're overweight or obese. They had trouble controlling the amount that they ate on their previous way of eating. When you eat plant-based foods, you get to eat a lot more, which is wonderful because you can feel sated or satiated when you eat, but you don't have to worry as much about consuming excess calories, which lead to the overweight and the obesity problems. And so eat more food, number one, if you're tired. Number two, sometimes your gut needs a chance to adapt, right? It's been used to taking in and digesting and absorbing the nutrients from your old or your previous or your standard American diet for, again, 20, 30, 40 years or more. Mm-hmm. So the whole lining of your digestive tract is optimized. Even if you're not healthy, it's still optimized for absorbing your nutrition from your previous diet. So when you change your way of eating over time or overnight, for some people, they get excited. Hey, I want to go vegan. I watched The Game Changers. I watched Sports Over Knives, whatever it might be. Your gut's not optimized to absorb nutrients from this new healthy way of eating. It doesn't mean the vegan diet is devoid of nutrients or isn't going to provide you with abundance of energy. It means you need to give your body time to adapt. And so if that means eating a piece of meat, once a day or once a week or once every other week for a little while, because your body's used to eating that food and it'll make you feel a certain way, then do that. But know that over time, your body's going to get better and better at absorbing nutrition from your newer, healthier diet. And you're going to have less of a need or a want or a desire for those old foods. Number three, nutrition is based, all the foods that we consume, they're chemicals, right? Just like heroin, just like cocaine, just like caffeine, or just like nicotine. And we develop a dependence for these chemicals. And so sometimes when you go from your old way of eating to your new way of eating, even if your gut's working really well and it absorbs nutrition well, digests and absorbs your nutrition well, you may get some feelings of, what's the term, withdrawal. Just like you do when you go off drinking coffee or when you go off drinking cigarettes and you feel like junk, right? Because you're not bringing in all those same chemicals that your body's used to getting on an hourly or a daily basis from the old foods that you used to eat. And so again, but guess what, right? The caffeine headaches, the caffeine withdrawal headaches, or the jitters or the whatever you get with the cigarettes, they don't last forever. You just got to get through that initial phase of withdrawal and give your body a chance to basically kind of detox and clean out that old stuff and transition and adapt to your new way of eating without those other chemicals, and you'll be just fine, right? And so it's like, hey, if you feel bad for a day, that's totally normal. If you go from couch potato to trying to run a marathon, and say you go from couch potato today and you want to decide to go run 5 or 10 miles, how are you going to feel? You're going to feel miserable because your body's not fit. You have to gradually build up your exercise over time if you want to run a 5K, and especially if you want to run a marathon. Well, it takes practice with good eating too. The body's many times isn't going to just overnight be optimized for absorbing nutrition from a really healthy diet. You got to give it a little bit of time. So be patient. The most important thing is consistency. When you consistently eat nutritious, whole, health-promoting foods, that is what's going to help adapt your body toward optimizing its capacity to utilize those nutrients, and you'll never look back, I promise.
Super well said. I don't know that I have much to add to that, except, that I also remind people of all the different factors that could contribute to this. For example, sleep hygiene, iron intake, things like that. If you stop eating, people eat red meat all the time and then they go vegan and they eat nothing but salad, and then it's like, well, maybe you're not getting enough iron. And that's the reason. It's not the protein or the meat or something like that. And then just a friendly reminder that carbohydrates are our body's preferred energy source. So in terms of energy levels, there's so much more to unpack than just, I switched to a plant-based diet and now I'm tired. But
exactly. And point said, right? For all the people that say, I switched to a plant-based diet and I didn't feel vital, or I didn't have good energy levels, or I didn't feel strong, whatever it is, I think that they're by far and away the minority, right? But the negative stories tend to get more airtime and tend to get more attention from us. If it's our friend or our family member, our coworker, or some acquaintance, or some Instagram influencer, right? Whoever it is, some, athlete or movie star who might get a lot of attention and have a lot of followers. And they say, oh, this happened to me, or I didn't feel good, or I had to give up my vegan diet because of XYZ, because I didn't feel good. That gets a lot more airtime than the countless number of people who are feeling great on a plant-based diet. But guess what? They're not having to talk about it all the time. Oh, my vegan this, and I feel so good, because they're just living their best life, right? They're not on their Instagram channel saying, oh, me, oh, my vegan, oh, poor me, oh, I don't feel good, right? And so know that for every person who may have a negative comment about plant-based or vegan nutrition, there's probably 99 out of 100, or at least 95 out of 100, who are just doing incredible, and you're not getting any airtime about it, because who cares that you've got a lot of energy and you're doing great, right? It just doesn't matter. Right. And so know that for anybody who complains, there's way more people who are just doing great. And if you are complaining, it has to do with the reasons that I provided before, right? You may need to give yourself more time. You may need to up the amount of food that you're eating because you're eating a lower calorie density diet, Or that being said, eat some more calorie dense foods, right? Nuts and seeds are very calorie dense. Olive oil is very calorie dense. Um, dried fruit compared to fresh fruit is much more calorie dense because it doesn't have all the water weight. And so if you're needing to get more calories in, eat some of those more calorie dense foods, and of course eat more of these carbohydrate, but of course complex carbohydrate rich foods, because they're going to be our best source of long-term energy. Sweet potatoes, any kind of whole grain, whether it be quinoa, brown rice, millet, whole grain wheat, which are wheat berries in their whole form, rye, whatever it is, right? And then certainly more beans, people. Beans are a wonder food. I guarantee you there's no more food that's associated with living a healthy, long, vibrant life than eating more beans. And so if you're not eating beans on a daily basis, I implore you to give them a try. And if they give you gas or bloating, again, consistency is key, right? So start small, even if it only means eating one spoonful of beans today, but do it every day for a week. And then after you eat one spoonful of beans every day for a week or two, then go up to 2 spoonfuls. And before you know it, you'll be eating beans a half a cup or a cup at a time. And beans should be something that you're prioritizing every day, along with your dark leafy greens, your other fruits and vegetables, your whole grains. But beans are a superfood, people, and you should be getting them in abundance on the daily basis, especially if you want to feel great, be strong, tear up your runs, your workouts, your bike rides, whatever it is. More beans.
Awesome. Well said. All right. So our next statement is, this concern, a lot of times there's a concern that at certain stages of the life cycle, we can't be on a plant-based diet because we need either the meat or the dairy or some combination, and this comes up a lot for children, infants, as a parent of vegan children. This concern comes up a lot, and it's a genuine concern for people, or maybe for people who are elders, thinking that it's just not possible to stay on a plant-based diet for those reasons. So do you have thoughts to share?
Definitely. There are some issues with some of these populations, with pregnancy, with breastfeeding, in the elderly, right? Elderly people, protein is more of a concern in elderly people. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't get an abundance of protein, like we've already talked about in depth, on a plant-based diet. But they should be, again, if they're eating a well-rounded diet, if they're concentrating on whole plant foods versus eating Doritos and Dr. Pepper, right, which aren't going to give you a lot of protein and certainly aren't going to promote good health, right? But if you're eating the beans, the high protein seeds like hemp seeds and pine nuts and whatever other kind, all the nuts and seeds are going to be good sources of protein. But again, I can't emphasize beans enough. Beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils, all the different varieties. We need to be eating them on the daily, multiple times a day if possible. And if you're not doing that now, you just do the best you can. Nutrition is always an all or something. It's never an all or nothing, right? So if you don't eat beans for a couple of days and then you figure, oh man, I can't work beans into my thing, I'm just going to give up on it and just not even worry about it. No, you can start eating well at any meal. Even if you had a trash breakfast of Doritos and Dr. Pepper, you can start eating something good for lunch, right? And even if your whole day was bad and you just ate junk food all day, you can start tomorrow, right? So it's all or something, never all or nothing. And same thing with pregnancy. There's certain nutrients of concern, and some people will point to, oh, I had a neighbor or a family member, or I saw some research that showed that when you were pregnant or you were breastfeeding, it was no good to do on a plant-based diet. Simply, that's a farce. If you're doing it like any diet should be, right? Whether you're an omnivore or you're on a keto diet or you're on a plant-based vegan diet, of course, that should be a predominantly whole food, plant-based vegan diet to optimize our health. If you're the key with any diet is well planned, right? You're not going to do well on any diet if it's not well-rounded and well planned. And so if you got a well-planned vegan diet, it can work for any stage of the life cycle, whether you're pregnant, breastfeeding, an older adult, you're an infant. Now, of course, infants should be breastfeeding, and so they're drinking mother's milk, which isn't vegan, right? But the mother can be vegan. And when you transition an infant to food, They never need eat animal products, full stop, right? You can transition them from breastfeeding to incorporating foods along with breastfeeding, right? And they can eat and they can just be plant-based for the rest of their lives. And there's countless examples when this is done right, right? Again, a well-planned, well-varied diet that's incorporating all those wonderful food groups, the legumes, the beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils, the whole grains, mushrooms, which are a fungus, but we usually tend to lump them in with vegetables, but they're wonderful. And we should be trying to get mushrooms in on a regular basis. Nuts and seeds, and then herbs and spices, right? You're getting in those food groups, and your fruits and veggies. I may not have mentioned them. And it doesn't have to be a huge variety of all these things on every day, right? Where again, it's all or something. But if it's a well-rounded diet and it's planned, right? And you're getting your supplements if you need to, like your B12, and like vitamin D3 is a big thing, right? Because most Americans are low in vitamin D, but there's no difference between vegans and omnivores. Everybody tends to be low in vitamin D. And so that's another good supplement that it would just be wise for people to consider supplementing, at least in the winter when we definitely don't get enough exposure to the sunlight to synthesize enough vitamin D. But the whole point is that an exclusively plant-based or vegan diet can be healthy for any person at any stage of the life course when it's done well. It just needs to be well planned.
Right. Just like any diet would. And whenever people, tell me that kids need X, Y, and Z, I like to tell them kids need whole plant foods to grow up big and strong. Kids need vegetables and fruits, like whole grains.
It's just like the protein, right? Like, where do you get your protein? And then the vegan turns around to the omnivore and says, hey, man, if you're having to ask me that question, you should really be thinking more about where you're getting your protein. And same thing, oh, you need cow's milk to grow big and strong for kids, or you need beef or chicken or lamb or fish, to grow big, strong muscles for a kid. And it's like, no, most kids are getting way more animal products than they could ever need. And they're getting way fewer whole plant foods than they need to be healthy. And that's why we have such a huge preponderance of type 2 diabetes, overweight and obesity in children, all kinds of other health issues, asthma, other types of, what are they called? Autoimmune conditions, right? Where our own immune systems attack our bodies. This doesn't have to do with people, getting too many plants. These issues have to do with people getting too few plants. And so it's so simple, just like you say, hey man, kids need more whole plant foods to be healthy and strong, and certainly to lower their risk for chronic diseases that are going to totally rob them of having a high quality of life. They don't need more meat, dairy, and eggs.
Right. Well said. All right, our next statement. So let's talk about soy. This is a hot topic. It comes up a whole lot, and I hear this all the time, especially because my kids were eating soy at very young ages, and so people had concerns about whether or not soy causes cancer, or the estrogen in soy. You hear this stereotype that soy makes cisgender men grow breasts, or things of all these types of things that we hear about soy. So just off the top, what are your thoughts about soy and some of these statements?
Well, first of all, there's a ton of research out there that's looked at this topic, right? And overwhelmingly, the research shows there's no doubt here. There's no, oh, it could be this or it could be that. Full stop. The research overwhelmingly shows that soy is protective against cancer. And it's overall just protective in terms of promoting good health. And so if people want to question that, it's because they either haven't looked at the research and they're just regurgitating something that they got from some YouTuber or some Instagram influencer or Joe Rogan or whoever it might be, right? Somebody who's not a researcher, who has never actually looked at the science, and especially somebody who's not able to weigh the quality of the evidence, right? There's a lot of research studies that get published. Problem is, a lot of those studies are really poor quality studies. And so you need a scientist or somebody who has training in how to evaluate the research to determine what research is good and what research is just total nonsense. And again, if you look at quality research, it shows that soy is protective. Now, there are some very few cases, these are like case reports where they look at one person where somebody was like eating soy, all they were eating was soy all day, every day, where they saw some gynecomastia, is I believe what the condition is called, where the men grew breasts, but they literally had to be eating just ungodly amounts of soy for that to happen. And that may have only been in certain people who were just had like a predisposition to it. But nobody's recommending that you just eat tofu, and that's because that, again, that's not a well-rounded, varied diet. You need to be eating loads of other fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and other legumes. Your soy is a legume. I told people more legumes, more beans, right? But we need to be eating a variety of all these foods. Nobody's recommending that you just sit around and eat tofu and edamame all day. And so nobody could even get close to reaching any kind of a level where they could potentially get some gynecomastia, And the bottom line is, again, it's going to protect you against breast cancer. In men, it's going to protect you against prostate cancer, something that far too many, millions of men have issues with, right? And then it leads to problems like impotence, right? Which is going to totally affect your love life. It's going to lead to problems like incontinence, where you lose your bladder control or you're not able to empty your bladder like you should, right? These are really big issues that totally degrade and tear people's quality of life. They just rip it away. And soy is going to be protective against all those things happening. So again, I tell you, you need not fear soy, but we want to be eating it less in, there's a lot of soybean oil in a lot of the processed foods that I eat, that come in bags and forms of chips and cookies and crackers. And we want to be eating more whole food versions of soy, right? So tofu is not a whole food version, but it's still a healthy version. But the healthiest versions are the whole food versions, which are tempeh, which is a fermented form of soy, and your edamame, which is just whole soybeans. And so those are your two best. But tofu and soy milk are also very minimally processed sources. They're more processed than our whole versions, but they're minimally processed and they're still very health promoting foods, and less of the highly fractionated, soy meat curls or things that are soy products, but they're highly processed. We're going to want to eat fewer of those when possible. Nothing wrong with eating some of that as a special treat or something, or on occasion, but eating more of these whole minimally processed forms of soy to optimize our health.
For sure. And then, just an interesting side is that soy contains phytoestrogen, which is different than the estrogen that's in our bodies. And cow's milk actually contains estrogen. So, anyone who's concerned with their intake of estrogen should be more focused on getting the cow's milk and the dairy products out, right?
Because the mammalian, we are mammals, cows are mammals. The mammalian form of estrogen is going to be the most dangerous, right? Not the phytoestrogen. The phytoestrogen is actually opposite. It's protective as opposed to being a health risk, right? Because the phytoestrogen binds to similar receptors. For instance, take breast cancer, right? In women's breasts. High estrogen levels increase our risk for breast cancer. So if we're consuming more cow's milk, that cow's milk estrogen is going to bind to those certain receptors in our breast tissue, and it's going to increase our risk for breast cancer. What does phytoestrogen do? It's going to bind to those similar receptors, but it does not have the same action in the body of actual estrogen. It's a phytoestrogen. It's completely different, right? It's got a similar form so that the body recognizes it as an estrogen, but what it does is it binds and it blocks that same tissue from absorbing the mammalian estrogen that's coming from cow's milk or coming from, beef. You're going to get it if you eat beef too. You're still going to get estrogen that way, but you're going to get more in the cow byproduct, in the cow's milk. And so it's protecting you of the negative impacts of the actual estrogen that's coming from mammals. So important that people understand that phytoestrogen is protective. It doesn't act like mammalian estrogen in the body in terms of increasing our risk for these diseases and especially these cancers.
Right. Thanks for breaking that down so well. All right. We've got a couple more, and then hopefully we might have a minute or two for questions at the end, Q&A. But again, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or in the Q&A right now. So plant-based diets are too restrictive. And there's another one we hear a lot. I can't go vegan because I don't like salad. You have to eat salads all the time, everywhere you go, or you can't eat out anywhere because there's just no options. Um, so what are your thoughts on restriction and plant-based diets?
I got to tell you, Tony, I'm really growing tired of this whole vegan thing. I'm thinking about giving it up tomorrow because it's too restrictive, man. No, I can't tell you how many people, and I think you've got this on the next slide with our facts, right?
Yeah.
But overwhelmingly, it's happened to me. I'm sure it happened to you. It's happened to countless other people that I've seen on interviews, on podcast interviews, on documentaries, people in my own life, friends, family members, extended family who've transitioned to a plant-based diet who say, my diet has gotten so much more open, diverse, interesting, tasty since I went plant-based. So the opposite happened. It opened up a huge variety because we have literally tens of thousands of edible varieties of different kinds of plants on our planet. Whereas you can count on one hand, right? I've got beef, I've got poultry, I've got fish, and lump in with beef lamb, like another red meat, right? But basically beef, poultry, fish, dairy products, and eggs, and yeah, you could count a few other things in there if you want to get particular. But, you basically, the different animal products you put on one or two hands. Whereas, plants, you could never name them all, even if you tried. And so, it's a wonderful opportunity when you go plant-based to totally open up to a whole new way of eating and think about all the different cultural foods, Asian foods, North African foods, Middle Eastern foods, Greek foods, Italian foods. So many of these different cultural foods have naturally been plant-based or predominantly plant-based, right? Mixing a grain with a different kind of vegetable with a soy product or a different kind of bean. Same thing with Latin American foods, right? The land of rice and beans, or the land of the three sisters, right? Here in the Southwest, throughout all of Mexico and Central America, we had corn and we had beans and we had squash. And so people naturally have been eating this way for literally thousands upon thousands of years. And of course, when people predominantly ate those foods, guess what? We didn't have hardly any, if any at all. We didn't have any type 2 diabetes, heart disease, overweight, and obesity, right? These diseases of excess, because we're consuming too much of things that are deleterious or negative in terms of their impact on our health. They were just consuming whole plant foods. And guess what happens on a whole food plant-based diet? You get trimmer, you feel good in your body, your risk for asthma and allergies and inflammation and congestion and all these other things goes down, and your energy levels go up. So you can actually enjoy doing the things that you've always wanted to do or that you most enjoy doing. I can't tell you how good it is, Tony, to just eat a great plant-based meal, rice and beans and green chili, right? And loads of other vegetables, and, make a great sauce to go on top or something to give yourself some extra flavor, and then eat a great meal, feel satisfied, and then be able to go out and play sports or take my dogs on a walk or go on a hike and never go into a food coma. But when I was on I was always on a healthier version of the standard American diet. But when I loaded in meat or dairy or eggs and, some more processed foods into my diet, I'd eat and I'd have the food coma effect. And I feel like junk after I eat, or even if I didn't feel like junk after I ate, I didn't feel optimized. I didn't feel great after I ate. Whereas on a whole food plant-based diet, I just feel good, from sun up to sundown and afterwards. And it's just, there's nothing better than feeling great in your body.
Yeah.
Nobody could tell me to eat more meat and eggs and dairy or, candy bars to take that away from me, even if they gave it all to me for free and they cooked it up in the most delicious way possible, because I used to be addicted to food. Now I'm addicted to feeling good, and nothing else can replace that.
Yeah. Well said. Thanks for sharing that. I just want to make a couple quick points, and then we have one more topic to discuss. But, for people who are going to crave, meats or eggs or cheeses, or just kind of that's a scary thing, or, some comfort foods that you grew up with, you might not want to eat them every single day, but you want to have them every now and then. There's a wide variety of plant-based meats, eggs and cheese products that if you really want to, recreate those chile rellenos or, that fried egg meal that you grew up with or something, you can do that on a plant-based diet with some of these products or recipes that are available. Chefs have pretty much recreated everything at this point. And then most restaurants nowadays actually do offer plant-based entrees. And if not, they are willing to accommodate, because this is such a trending topic right now. It's like the hottest thing in the food industry and the restaurant industry. So, that's definitely the idea that you can't eat out anywhere if you're on a plant-based diet. It's definitely a myth, and it's just only getting better and better and more widely available as time goes on. So, with that said, our last one that I just want to touch briefly on is this idea that plant-based eating is too expensive, and it's only attainable for certain people, or only people with a certain privilege can maintain a plant-based diet. And I've even heard variations of this. I went to the store and all I bought was 2 different fruits and it costed $30. How can I sustain this way of eating, right? So what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, same with all the other stuff, right? Like, yeah, you can, get some artisanal, something or other that costs you an arm and a leg. But just like, but you can do the same. I mean, look at how expensive meat and dairy is, number one, right? It's like we spend all this money on these animal products that not only do they steal our health away over time, they make us fat and sick. But secondarily, they cost us a lot of money. And sure, you can spend a lot of money on certain plant-based foods if you want to get, some fancy this or fancy that. But you've got it on the next slide, Tony. Plant-based staples like rice and beans, right, are the cheapest foods on earth, right? You can get a load of rice and beans. So we use those foods as the base. We get most of our calories from foods like rice and beans. And then we use some of the more exciting stuff, right? A special sauce, or a little bit of plant-based cheese, right? Or a little bit of plant-based meat, or some really fun fruits and vegetables to make our grains, right? We take our oatmeal, which is dirt cheap, right? And we throw a few almonds on there, which are a little more expensive, but it doesn't take a lot, right? Or we throw a few blueberries on there, which are a little more expensive, but it doesn't take a lot. But most of our calories are coming from those staples, right? The whole grains, the legumes, and certainly potatoes, right? Think of all purple potatoes, russet potatoes, sweet potatoes. Potatoes are wonderfully healthy. People need not fear them, right? Especially sweet potatoes. They're one of the healthiest foods you can eat. And so eating more of those staples, right? The tubers, the other kinds of starchy vegetables, right? Like different kinds of starchy squash, like butternut squash, or, acorn squash, your legumes and your grains. Those are the base of any good diet. They're dirt cheap and they're super good for you. They're going to give you your protein, your complex carbohydrates, and of course, a little bit of fat. And then you just supplement with the fancy stuff, whether it's the kale or the blueberries or whatever it might be, or some almonds or macadamia nuts, right? That are going to give you that extra texture, that extra flavor. And then number 2, right? You can eat blueberries in a number of different ways. You can get the ones that are, super expensive at the co-op, which there's nothing wrong with that. Or you can get a big bag of frozen blueberries that per pound are going to be much cheaper than the fresh blueberries, because we don't have to worry about those going bad in 3 or 4 days. Those are going to last for months in your freezer. So shop wisely, right? Take advantage of the deal. Some produce, even the more expensive stuff, is going to be less expensive certain times a year, because if it's in season, there's a lot of it around. And so grocery stores and farmers and everything need to get rid of it. So the prices are going to come down because the supply is really high. Number 2, shop smart. And so take advantage of getting blueberries when they're out of season frozen, because they're going to be much cheaper per pound that way. And you're not going to have to worry about them going bad on you in just a few days. And so you can enjoy blueberries for weeks and weeks. Better deal. And you get to make sure that you don't waste them, because the other reason we waste money is because we waste so much food. It's just money down the drain. When you're taking advantage of things like frozen fruits and vegetables, or even some canned stuff, just making sure that it's low sodium or no salt added canned foods, you can, again, these foods aren't going to go bad on you right away. So your food waste is going to go through the floor way down, and you're going to be saving more money that way. People often don't think about that, right? They just think about what they're spending at the store or at the restaurant. They don't think about how much money they're just wasting away because they're throwing food away.
Yeah, those are all super good points. And that's mostly my thoughts as well. And with this, I do want to say access to healthy plant-based foods is an issue for some people. It can be an issue depending on where you live and what's available to you, and if you have, what grocery stores you have access to. And so that's why, part of this, we do need to advocate for improved access to healthy plant-based foods. One of the cool things is that every time you shop at the grocery store and you buy these foods, you're voting with your dollar for more of those foods. And there's other ways that we can advocate for that as well. So I feel like most people, if you have some control over your choices, whether you're purchasing foods with cash, or different cash assistance or EBT or something like that, you can always make choices and advocate for different types of foods. But we do recognize that access is an issue and a barrier for some people. And so we all need to collectively work on that. So those were all of our, yeah, thanks. We're kind of at the end of the time frame. If you're cool with it, Gabriel, I'll hang out for a couple more minutes and just see if anybody has any other questions before we wrap up and end it. If people need to get off, of course, that's totally fine. But we will hang out for a couple more minutes and see if there's any questions, any lingering questions. And so while
Sounds great.
While I'm just waiting to see if any questions pop up, I just want to say one question that comes up most often is, how do I get started? And so my recommendation to people is just to pick the 5 meals that you eat most often, your 5 go-to meals, and figure out how to make those plant-based. If health is your goal, figure out how to get more vegetables into that meal, or how to make it with more whole plant foods. And then once you've got those 5 meals down and you get them to where you like the taste and you like the price and you like the convenience, because those are 3 things that factor into our food choices. So if it's just as easy to make and it can cost about the same, you've got your 5 go-to meals down. And then you can pick a few more meals, do the same thing. You kind of keep doing that. That's one way that I like to recommend people go about it. And if you want more info on how to get started, we have lots more resources on our website. We have a podcast called Teach Me How to Vegan, which sort of serves as a how-to guide for switching to a plant-based diet or going vegan. We've also got blog posts and our webinars like this one, and there's just so many resources available. Before we went live, we were just talking about how many great resources there are on social media, if you know how to sift through and find the reliable ones, right? So there's just a vast majority. And then, as Gabriel mentioned earlier, the nutritionfacts.org, great source for nutrition information. Delicious recipes, we've got tons of those on our website as well. So that's apnm.org/plant-based. That's where we've got tons of resources. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter, which just has news, classes, and a monthly recipe, and so much more. Do you have any favorite resources or recipe pages to share before we log off?
Great question, Tony. I did an internship at a great place called the True North Health Center. And if for any of you haven't heard about it, just check it out. Go to their website. You can just Google True North Health Center. They're located in Santa Rosa, California, and they specialize in whole food, plant-based nutrition because they're actually a health center, unlike almost every other, hospital and health system around the United States that literally feed people the same food that made them fat and sick in the first place, right? You get all the same stuff. You get the chicken nuggets and you get the steak and you get the eggs and cheese and everything else. And you hardly get any of the foods that we know promote health and can even, treat and even reverse a number of our chronic diseases. Those are whole plant foods, beans, grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, mushrooms, herbs, and spices. My man, getting excited about plants. And so they specialize in whole food, plant-based nutrition. And so when people go to True North Health Center, they walk in sick and they actually leave healthy and well. which is completely different from the rest of our health system in the United States, where people walk in sick and they usually leave just as sick as they walked in, sometimes even worse, because healthcare and doctors and prescribed medications and medical procedures are one of the leading causes of death in the United States. Very important people understand that. So we want to avoid going to the doctor whenever possible. That's not saying that there's a number of wonders of modern medicine. They do, they're very good at dealing with trauma. If you go in and your body's broken from a car accident or from a horrible fall, it's good to go to our healthcare system. But when it comes to treating chronic diseases, which are the things that are creating death and disability in the most people in the United States, our healthcare system does a very poor job of that. And it's slowly changing over time, but it's happening very slowly. And so anyway, they will do these wonderful cooking classes for their patients. And there's three chefs in particular. One's name is Ramses Bravo. He's the head chef of True North Health Center. And he's got a website called RamsesPB for plantbased.com. And he's got wonderful recipes on there. You can make sauces. And the cool thing about that is those are what I call the gold standard of plant-based nutrition, because not only are they whole food plant-based, but they're free of added salt, oil, and sugar. And so that takes plant-based to the next level, right? When we talk about adding either little, it doesn't have to be exclusively salt, oil, and sugar free, but salt, oil, and sugar are all ingredients that will tend to lower the health promoting qualities of a diet. So the more salt, oil, and sugar we add, our diet tends to be less nutritious or less health promoting. And so those recipes are awesome because they're basically free of added salt, oil, and sugar, but they still taste awesome, right? Salad dressings, everything you can think of, beautiful stuff. Sauces for your meals to make them taste great. So Ramses PB, that's RAMSESPB.com. And then two other chefs. One's named Katie May. She's wonderful. She's got a website called The Culinary Gym.com because she likes to translate fitness. It's a gym because it's basically culinary fitness, right? Learning how to cook is like learning how to get good at a physical activity. You have to practice it. And so that's why she calls her website or the services that she provides and the resources, the Culinary Gym, because she talks about building culinary fitness. It's like getting fit, learning how to combine different ingredients, learning how to be effective in the kitchen, the culinarygym.com. And then another one is, what's her name? Kathy, I can't remember her last name off the top of my head, but her website is called, what is it called? Real Plant. I'm drawing a blank off the top of my head. But let me see if I can just look it up real quick before we get off, because it's just another wonderful website. Kathy, what is her last name? I'm coming up with a blank. It's not Real Food. Oh, Straight Up Food. That's it. StraightUpFood.com. Isn't that another great name? The Culinary Gym, StraightUpFood.com. And again, it's whole food, plant-based, and it's very low in added salt, oil, and sugar. And so it's going to maximize the health promoting qualities of your nutrition, but it's not being cheap or it's not skimping on the flavor. The flavors are all still there. Wonderful, savory, sweet, sour, bitter, delicious food, right? StraightUpFood.com. And again, no relation to these people. I just know that they are chefs that are doing incredible work, and they're creating some of the healthiest recipes on the planet that not only taste good, which we know is important. Nobody's going to eat food long-term that they don't enjoy, right? So they not only taste good, but they optimize the health promoting qualities of the diet so that we can feel our best every day. Boom.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, drop the mic.
That's right, man.
That was awesome. All right. Yeah. Thanks everyone who's still on. Thank you for joining us. This is a really fun conversation. I enjoyed myself. Thank you, Gabriel, for joining us and sharing all that knowledge with us.
Oh, I enjoyed myself, Tony. Always, man.
Awesome. Appreciate that. So hope everyone has a good night, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.